What would a millionaire discover by secretly following his cleaner to a derelict house? The truth, revealed by her own children, would change his life forever. The rain lashed furiously against the 35th floor windows of the city's tallest corporate skyscraper. Richard Beaumont, his hands trembling, held the financial report that had just changed everything. The numbers didn't lie. Someone had been siphoning funds from his company, and suspicions pointed directly towards the cleaning department. "Impossible," he muttered, his eyes scanning every line of the document. For years, he had trusted his cleaning staff implicitly, especially Eleanor, the quiet woman who always worked late when he was still in the office. But the facts were irrefutable. Costly supplies were missing, specialized cleaning products that only the night staff had access to. The private investigator he had hired weeks ago had finally delivered his preliminary report. Security cameras showed suspicious movements, silhouettes carrying boxes after working hours. Richard felt as though his heart had been ripped out. How could the person he trusted most, the only employee who knew every private corner of his office, betray him in this manner? That night, as Eleanor finished her cleaning routine, Richard remained hidden in his darkened office. Through the crack in the door, he observed every movement of the woman who had cleaned his space for over 3 years. Her movements were the same as always, meticulous, respectful, almost reverent with every object she touched. But then something happened that made his blood run cold. Eleanor headed towards the supply cupboard with a key she definitely shouldn't possess. Richard watched as she took out several industrial cleaning products, specialized disinfectants, and other expensive items, carefully placing them into a large bag. His heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, confirming his worst fears. "I can't believe it," he whispered to himself, feeling the betrayal burn his chest like acid. For years, he had been generous with his employees, paid fair wages, offered bonuses on special occasions. Why would Eleanor do such a thing? Why risk everything for a few cleaning products? When Eleanor finished and headed towards the lift, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't call the police. He wouldn't confront the woman immediately. He needed to understand why. He needed to know what had led her to become a thief. Silently, Richard followed Eleanor to the car park. From his black Bentley, he maintained a discreet distance as the old double-decker bus pulled away through the city's wet streets. His heart pounded with a mixture of anger and disappointment he had never experienced. This woman had violated his trust in the most despicable way possible. The bus made several stops before Eleanor disembarked in a neighborhood Richard had never visited. It was an area where the streets were unpaved, where the houses seemed built from scraps of different materials, where poverty hung heavy in every corner. Richard continued to keep his distance, his Bentley completely out of place in the surroundings. Eleanor walked for another 20 minutes, carrying that bag containing the stolen products. Richard followed on foot, keeping to the shadows, feeling his anger grow with every step. What did she need so much disinfectant for? Did she have a parallel business selling cleaning products? The idea that he had inadvertently been funding a criminal operation turned his stomach. Finally, Eleanor stopped in front of a structure that left Richard speechless. It wasn't a house, but a derelict building, with cracked walls, broken windows covered with cardboard, and a roof that had clearly seen better days. The place looked on the verge of collapsing, yet Eleanor headed towards the front door as if it were her home. "What is this place?" Richard wondered, feeling confusion gradually replace his anger. This didn't look like a professional thief's hideout. It seemed more like the refuge of someone desperate. Eleanor opened the door and disappeared inside. Richard waited a few minutes before cautiously approaching. The boarded-up windows didn't allow him to see anything, but he could hear voices inside. Voices that left him completely paralyzed. They were children's voices. "Mom, you're here!" he heard a child's voice say, full of joy. Leo was coughing all night, and Chloe has a high fever. Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the chest. Children. Eleanor had children living in that place. His mind slowly began to process a reality he hadn't considered. The cleaning products, the specialized disinfectants. What if she wasn't stealing them to sell? He moved closer to one of the windows that had a small hole in the cardboard covering it. What he saw through that tiny opening changed everything he thought he knew about Eleanor Morgan. Inside that derelict house, lit only by candles, there were 3 children. A teenager who seemed to be looking after 2 younger children, one of whom was clearly ill. Eleanor had taken out the cleaning products and was meticulously disinfecting every surface, every corner of that precarious dwelling. Her movements were the same ones Richard had observed in his office. Careful, methodical, filled with a love that he now understood completely. "My boy, come here," he heard Eleanor say to the youngest child. We need to clear that cough. I can't lose you too." Richard stumbled backwards, feeling tears begin to well in his eyes. Two? What did that mean? His heart broke as he realized he had misjudged this woman. She wasn't stealing out of greed or malice. She was stealing to survive, to keep her children alive in conditions no human being should face. But then a child's broken voice pierced the night like a dagger. "Mum, will Dad ever come back? Will he come and help us, like he promised before he went to heaven?" The silence that followed was more devastating than any cry. Richard understood in that moment that this woman was not only battling poverty, but also the loss of someone very important. And while he had been worrying about a few cleaning products, she had been fighting an epic battle to keep her family alive. Richard remained motionless for several minutes, processing the devastating reality he had just uncovered. His legs trembled as he silently moved away from the window, his mind struggling to comprehend how he had been so blind to the suffering of one of his most dedicated employees. He returned to his Bentley with a broken heart, but couldn't start the engine. His hands trembled so much he couldn't insert the key. The child's words kept echoing in his head like a painful refrain. "Dad will come back one day." The innocence of that question, the desperate hope in that childish voice, had struck him harder than any business news he had ever received. He sat there, watching that ramshackle house where a single mother struggled to keep her 3 children alive. Through the cracks in the walls, he could see the faint candlelight flickering, creating dancing shadows that seemed to tell a story of resilience and unbreakable love. "My God, what have I done?" Richard murmured, burying his face in his hands. For weeks, he had been planning to dismiss Eleanor. He had considered pressing charges for theft. He had allowed distrust to poison every interaction with her. And all this time, she had been using those products to create a clean and safe environment for her sick children. He then remembered all the times he had seen Eleanor working late, always with a dedication that he had found admirable, but which he now understood completely. Every extra minute she spent in the office meant additional money for her family, another opportunity to bring home the necessary resources to support her children. Suddenly, he heard voices coming from inside the house. It sounded like some kind of crisis was unfolding. Richard silently got out of the car and approached the window again, his heart pounding with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mum, Leo can't breathe properly," he heard a little girl's voice say, full of panic. "He's turning very blue and making strange noises when he tries to breathe." Richard saw Eleanor moving frantically inside the room, holding the youngest child while trying to calm him. The scene unfolding before his eyes was heartbreaking. A desperate mother trying to save her child with extremely limited resources. "Sam, bring the steamer we made with the pot," Eleanor ordered, her voice trembling but firm. "Chloe, help me hold your little brother while we give him the steam. We're going to get him through this, my love. Mum won't let anything bad happen to you." Richard watched, fascinated, as this family improvised medical solutions with basic elements. Sam, the eldest son, moved a pot of hot water near the youngest child, creating a homemade steamer while his sister held the baby's head. Their coordination spoke of a routine established by necessity, of siblings who had learned to care for each other in impossible circumstances. "Why does Leo get so sick, Mum?" Chloe asked, with that brutal honesty only children possess. "Is it because we live here? Is it because we don't have heating like my friends' houses?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Richard saw Eleanor struggling to hold back tears as she continued to apply the improvised steam to her youngest son's airways. The girl's question had touched a devastating truth that everyone in that family knew, but no one dared to fully verbalize. "My love," Eleanor finally replied, her voice breaking. "Sometimes life gives us very difficult challenges, but the important thing is that we have each other. And Mum will do everything possible to make sure you're all right. Dad is looking after us from heaven, and he wants us to be strong." Richard felt tears begin to roll down his cheeks. The strength of this woman, her ability to maintain hope in such desperate circumstances, moved him in a way he had never experienced. All his life he had been surrounded by luxury, comforts, immediate solutions to any problem. He had never faced the reality of having to choose between buying medicine for a sick child or paying for decent housing. "Mum," Sam said with a maturity that tore at the heart, "I'm not going to school tomorrow. I'm staying to look after Leo and Chloe while you work. Besides, I heard they need helpers loading boxes at the Central Market. Can I earn some extra money?" "No, my boy," Eleanor replied firmly, though her voice trembled with emotion. "Your education is the most important thing. It's the only way you can have a different life than mine one day. I won't allow you to sacrifice your future for our current situation." "But Mum, we need the money," Sam insisted. "And besides, if Leo gets worse, someone has to be here to take him to the NHS hospital." You can't miss work because we need that wage. Richard realized he was witnessing a conversation that constantly repeated itself in that family. The terrible decision between immediate survival and future hope. Every day, Eleanor had to choose between caring for her sick children or keeping the job that kept them alive. And her children, barely children, were already taking on responsibilities that belonged to adults. Listen closely, Eleanor said, pulling her 3 children into a collective hug that Richard could clearly see through the window. I know the situation is very difficult right now. No. I know you're cold, that Leo is sick, that sometimes there isn't enough food, but I promise you this will change. Mum is working very hard to get a better place to live. Really, Mum? Chloe asked with those bright eyes full of childlike hope. We're going to have a house with heating, and Leo will be able to breathe better. Yes, my love, Eleanor replied, although Richard could detect the uncertainty behind that promise. We're going to have a real home, with rooms for each of you, with hot water, with everything you deserve. Richard felt his heart break as he realized that Eleanor was making promises she might not be able to keep. With her cleaner's salary, even working overtime, it would be almost impossible for her to lift her family out of that situation. And yet, she continued to nourish her children's hope, because it was the only thing that kept them together and eager to fight. It was then that he heard something that completely changed his perspective on the entire situation. Sam, Eleanor said in a low voice, believing the younger children couldn't hear. I need you to know something important. The job at Mr. Beaumont's company. Lately, I've had to take some things from the office. Cleaning products, disinfectants. I know it's wrong, but with Leo so sick and no money to buy medicine. Mum, you don't have to explain anything, Sam interrupted with a wisdom that didn't belong to his years. You always do the right thing. If you took those things, it's because you had no other option. Dad always said that when it comes to protecting the family, a parent does whatever is necessary. Richard gasped. Eleanor was confessing to her eldest son that she had been taking products from the office, but the way she did it was not like a criminal justifying her actions. It was like a desperate mother explaining to her child why she had had to compromise her own moral values to keep them alive. But son, Eleanor continued with tears in her eyes, I want you to understand that this is not what I want to teach you. In normal circumstances, I would never take something that doesn't belong to me. Your dad was an honest, hard-working man, and he wanted you to grow up to be people of integrity. What I'm doing now is only until we find a solution. Mum, Dad would do the same if he were here, Sam replied, hugging his mother. He taught us that the most important thing is to take care of the family, and you're doing exactly that. Richard had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. The conversation he had just heard had impacted him more profoundly than any previous experience in his life. This woman had been tortured by the guilt of taking those products. She had been teaching her children that what she was doing wasn't right, but that sometimes extreme circumstances forced people to make impossible choices. Suddenly, Leo began to cough violently. A wet, worrying sound that made the whole family move immediately. Richard saw Eleanor holding the little boy while Sam and Chloe ran to get more hot water for the improvised steamer. Leo, my love, calm down, Eleanor whispered as she rocked the child. Mum is here. Everything will be okay. Breathe slowly, just like I taught you. But Richard could see that the situation was worsening. The child's lips had a bluish tint that was definitely not normal, and his breathing was becoming increasingly laborious. It was evident that he needed urgent professional medical attention. Mum, Sam said with growing panic in his voice. I think we have to take him to the hospital. He's getting worse. My son, you know we don't have money for a private hospital, Eleanor replied desperately, and at the NHS hospital, they'll take hours to see us. Besides, they'll ask us a lot of questions about where we live, about our situation. Richard realized that Eleanor was afraid to seek medical help, not only for financial reasons, but also because she feared that the authorities would realize the conditions in which she was raising her children. The fear of having her children taken away for negligence or for living in inadequate conditions was paralyzing her just when she most needed to act. Mum, I don't care what they say, Sam insisted. If Leo suffers because we didn't take him to the hospital, I'll never forgive myself, and neither will you. Those words were like a stab for Richard. 1, 2, yeah. Old boy was facing the real possibility of losing his younger brother due to lack of medical resources. He was watching a family tear itself apart between love, fear, and desperation. Eleanor finally made a decision that demonstrated the true magnitude of her maternal love. You're right, my son, she said with determination, wrapping Leo in a worn blanket. We're going to the NHS hospital. I don't care what we have to face afterwards. The important thing now is to save your little brother." Richard watched them leave the derelict house in the early hours of the morning. A silent procession of figures wrapped in ragged blankets walking in the rain towards a distant bus stop. Eleanor carried Leo, while Sam held Chloe's hand. And they all moved with that desperate urgency of those who know that every minute counts. It was at that moment that Richard Beaumont made the most important decision of his life. He couldn't stand there, a passive spectator, while this family fought to survive. He couldn't return to his warm, comfortable mansion, knowing that just a few miles away, 3 innocent children were paying the price of circumstances completely beyond their control. He ran to his Bentley and started the engine. He had to do something. He had to help. But as he drove behind the bus carrying Eleanor's family towards the hospital, a question tormented him. How had he lived 45 years without realizing that this kind of suffering existed so close to him? And more importantly, what kind of man had he become if he had been able to judge a desperate mother without first trying to understand her story? Street. Michael's NHS hospital seemed a labyrinth of hopelessness under the pest. Intermittently flickering fluorescent lights. Richard arrived just minutes after Eleanor's family, parking his Bentley in an area where it definitely stood out among the dilapidated vehicles and ambulances constantly coming and going. From the main entrance, he could see Eleanor running towards the emergency desk, with Leo in her arms, while Sam and Chloe followed closely behind. The little boy had worsened during the bus journey. His breathing had become so laborious that even from a distance, Richard could see him struggling for every gasp of air. "Please, my son can't breathe," he heard Eleanor shout to the duty nurse, a middle-aged woman who seemed to have seen too much suffering to be surprised by anything. "He's been getting worse all night, and now he's turning blue. Please, you have to help him." The nurse, whose badge identified her as Sarah Davies, looked at the child with a professional but sympathetic expression. However, her next words were like daggers to anyone who heard them. "Madam, I see your son does indeed need immediate attention," Sarah said, as she quickly checked Leo's vital signs. "But I need you to complete these forms first. Personal information, address, NHS number, payment method." "Forms," Eleanor interrupted with evident desperation in her voice. "My son is very ill, and you're asking me for forms? Please, treat him first, and then we'll fill out all the paperwork you want." "I understand your concern, madam, but these are mandatory procedures," the nurse replied, with that institutional coldness characteristic of overburdened healthcare systems. "Without complete documentation, we cannot process his entry into the system." Richard observed the scene from a discreet distance, feeling indignation grow in his chest. He was witnessing how bureaucracy could become a tragedy for those without resources. While Leo struggled to breathe, the system demanded that his mother prioritize paperwork over her son's life. "Mum, just give her the papers she wants," Sam whispered, trying to be the responsible older brother that circumstances had forced him to become. "I can look after Chloe while you fill all that in." But when Eleanor began to complete the forms, the cruel reality of her situation became evident. In the address box, she froze. What could she write? Derelict house, no number, on the council estate. Wouldn't that raise suspicions about her ability to care for her children? "Madam, I need a valid address," Nurse Sarah insisted, noticing Eleanor's hesitation. "It's required information for the medical record." "It's just that we're in the process of moving," Eleanor lied, her hands trembling as she held the pen. "Temporarily, we're staying with relatives." "And the relatives' address then?" Sarah interrupted with increasing impatience. There was a queue of people waiting behind Eleanor, and it was evident that the pressure of work was affecting her patience. Richard watched as Eleanor slowly crumbled. She was a proud woman who had worked all her life, who had maintained her dignity even in the most adverse circumstances. But now, with her critically ill child in her arms, she was forced to lie and humiliate herself before a system that seemed designed to expel the most vulnerable. It was then that Leo suffered a sudden crisis. "My baby! Something's happening to my baby!" Eleanor screamed as little Leo suddenly worsened, and the entire room froze. The convulsions were terrifying to witness. Leo's tiny body convulsed violently while his eyes rolled completely white. Nurse Sarah finally reacted with the urgency the situation deserved from the beginning. "Code blue in emergencies. I need a doctor here immediately," she shouted as she took Leo from Eleanor's arms and ran towards the treatment rooms. "Don't take my son," Eleanor sobbed, trying to follow the nurse. "Please, let me be with him. He's just a baby, he's scared." "Madam, you need to stay here while we stabilize the child," a security guard told her, blocking her path with that impersonal authority characteristic of those who enforce regulations without considering the human pain they cause. Family members cannot enter the treatment area during medical emergencies. Richard witnessed Eleanor emotionally collapse. This strong woman, who had faced poverty, widowhood, and the responsibility of raising 3 children alone, finally broke down. She slumped into one of the plastic chairs in the waiting room, crying with an intensity that broke the heart of anyone who heard her. "Mum, don't cry," Chloe told her, with the innocent wisdom of children who have seen too much suffering. "Leo is very strong. Remember, Dad always said our family has warrior blood. Leo will be fine because he has your strength." The words of the 8-year-old girl revealed something fundamental about this family. They had lost their patriarch, but his legacy of strength lived on in each of its members. The children's father had clearly been an important figure who had taught them values of resilience and family unity. "How did Dad die, Mum?" Sam asked, his voice breaking, taking advantage of this vulnerable moment to ask a question he had evidently been repressing for a long time. "You never told us exactly what happened." Richard moved a little closer, undetected, sensing he was about to hear a fundamental truth for understanding this family's situation. Eleanor took a deep breath before answering, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "Your dad was a steelworker in construction," she began, her voice trembling. "He worked on very tall buildings, making those metal structures that hold everything up. One day, the company he worked for decided to save money on safety measures. There weren't enough harnesses. The platforms were in bad condition. Did he fall?" Chloe asked, with that brutal directness only children can express. "Yes, my love," Eleanor confirmed, hugging her 2 older children. "He fell from the 20th floor because the company didn't want to invest in adequate safety equipment. And when we tried to get them to help us, when we asked for compensation so we could get by, they told us it had been his fault for not being careful." Richard felt his blood run cold. This family had not only lost their main provider, but they had been victims of corporate negligence. A company had prioritized profits over human life, and when the consequences of that decision proved fatal, they had blamed the victim. "Is that why we couldn't stay in our old house?" Sam asked, connecting the dots with that precocious intelligence developed by children who grow up in adversity. "Exactly, my son," Eleanor replied. "Without Dad's wage, we couldn't pay the rent. The landlord kicked us out after 2 months of arrears. We lost everything. The furniture, family photos, even the toys Dad had bought them for Christmas." The image forming in Richard's mind was devastating. This family had had a normal life, a home, stability. Everything had collapsed due to corporate greed and a lack of social responsibility. Eleanor had gone from being the wife of a respected worker to a single mother struggling to keep her children alive in a derelict house. "But Mum," Chloe said, with that unbreakable hope of childhood, "you always say Dad is watching over us from heaven. Do you think he's helping Leo right now?" "Of course, my love," Eleanor replied, finding strength in the faith that had kept her family together. "Dad would never abandon us. He's talking to the doctors right now, telling them exactly how to cure Leo." It was at that moment that the doctor appeared, a young man who looked exhausted but maintained the professional serenity necessary to deliver medical news. Richard moved close enough to hear everything he had to say. "Morales family?" the doctor asked, consulting his clipboard. "Yes, I'm the mother," Eleanor replied, standing up immediately. "How is my son? Will he be okay? Your son Leo has a severe respiratory infection, complicated by malnutrition and prolonged exposure to adverse environmental conditions," the doctor explained, with medical terminology that sounded terrifying to unprofessional ears. "The convulsions were caused by lack of oxygen due to airway obstruction." "What does that mean in simple words, doctor?" Sam asked, again assuming the adult role that didn't belong to his 12 years. "It means your little brother is very ill because he has been breathing polluted air and has not received adequate nutrition to keep his immune system strong," the doctor explained, demonstrating an empathy that contrasted with the bureaucratic coldness of other hospital staff. "He needs immediate hospitalization, intravenous antibiotics, and intensive care for at least a week." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any shout. Richard watched as Eleanor slowly processed the implications of those words. Hospitalization meant expenses she could never cover. Intensive treatment meant she would have to miss work, losing the only income that kept her family alive. "Doctor," Eleanor said with a trembling voice, "how much will all that cost?" "Madam, right now the important thing is to save your son's life," the doctor replied, skillfully evading the financial question. "The economic aspects can be discussed later with the billing department." But Eleanor had lived enough poverty to understand that discussing it later meant accumulating an impossible debt. It meant that for years she would be paying medical bills that would keep her in absolute misery. "Is there a less expensive alternative?" she asked, with the desperation of a mother drowning in a sea of impossibilities. "Something I can do at home? I know how to care for sick children. I've been doing it for months." "Madam Morgan," the doctor said with firmness, but understanding. "Your son needs medical equipment that we only have here at the hospital. If you try to treat him at home, there's a very high probability that he won't survive. Are you willing to take that risk?" The question hung in the air like an emotional guillotine. Richard watched as Eleanor struggled internally between unconditional love for her son and the crushing reality of her economic situation. It was the cruelest decision any mother could face. Go into lifelong debt to save her son, or risk losing him due to lack of resources. It was then that Richard Beaumont made the decision that would change not only the life of the Morgan family but also his own existence. He stepped out of the shadows where he had been observing and approached the group directly. "Excuse me, doctor," he said, with that natural authority that money and power confer. "I am Richard Beaumont, and I will cover all of Leo Morgan's medical expenses. I want him to receive the best available treatment, no matter the cost." Eleanor turned to him with an expression of absolute shock. Her eyes filled with confusion, hope, and terror simultaneously. She couldn't comprehend why her boss, the man from whom she had been taking cleaning products, was standing in the emergency room of an NHS hospital, offering to pay for her son's treatment. "Mr. Beaumont," Eleanor stammered. "What? How? Why are you here?" Richard looked her directly in the eyes, and in that gaze, there was a mixture of shame, admiration, and determination that Eleanor had never seen before. "Eleanor," he said with an emotional voice, "I have come to ask for your forgiveness." The silence in the emergency room became so dense that it seemed even the medical machines had stopped making noise. Eleanor looked at Richard with an expression that combined shock, confusion, and pure terror. Her children had instinctively sought refuge behind her, not understanding why their boss had appeared out of nowhere at the most vulnerable moment of their lives. "Forgiveness?" Eleanor repeated, her voice barely audible, as if the words were stuck in her throat. "Mr. Beaumont, I don't understand what's happening. How did you know we were here? Why do you want to help Leo?" Richard took a deep breath, knowing that the following words would define not only the future of this family, but also the kind of man he would become from that moment on. "Eleanor, I need to confess something terrible," he began, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. "For weeks, I have been investigating you. I believed you were stealing cleaning products from the office. I hired a private detective. I reviewed the security cameras. I spied on you as if you were a criminal." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she understood the magnitude of the situation. Her worst nightmare was coming true. She had been discovered. But what devastated her most was not the fear of the consequences, but the shame of her children hearing that their mother had been labeled a thief. "Mum isn't a thief," Sam declared. "With that fierce protectiveness children develop when they see their parents attacked. My mum is the kindest person in the world. If she took those things, it was because we needed them so we wouldn't get sicker." "I know, son," Richard replied, addressing Sam directly with a respect that surprised everyone present. "And you're right. Your mum isn't a thief. I was an idiot who didn't understand anything. Are you going to put us in jail?" Chloe asked with that heartbreaking innocence of children who have learned too soon that the world can be cruel to the vulnerable. "No, my love," Richard replied, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "No one is going to jail, and no one is going to hurt your family ever again." The doctor, who had been listening to this entire conversation, cleared his throat discreetly. "Excuse me, but I need to know if you are authorizing immediate treatment for Leo. The child needs to be moved to intensive care right now." "Authorize everything," Richard ordered without hesitation. "The best available treatment, the best room, the best specialists. Money is no problem." "Mr. Beaumont," Eleanor interrupted, finding her voice despite the overwhelming situation. "I can't allow you to do this. I have no way to pay you back. With my cleaner's salary, it would take me my whole life to return that money." "Eleanor," Richard said, standing up and looking her directly in the eyes. "After what I've discovered tonight, after seeing how you've been living, after understanding why you were taking those products, I'm the one who should be paying. I should be paying for having been so blind, so insensitive, so completely oblivious to the suffering that was happening right under my nose." "What do you mean, after what you've discovered?" Eleanor asked, although a part of her feared the answer. Richard looked down, ashamed to have to admit the extent to which he had violated his employee's privacy. "I followed you home. I saw where you live. I saw how you care for your children. I saw how you used those products I thought you were stealing." Eleanor's expression changed from confusion to absolute horror. The idea that her boss had seen the deplorable conditions in which she was raising her children, that he had witnessed her greatest shame, filled her with such deep humiliation that she felt physically ill. You saw the derelict house," she murmured, covering her face with her hands. "You saw how we live. You saw that I don't have hot water, that there's no heating, that my children sleep on mattresses on the floor. I saw an extraordinary mother doing the impossible to keep her children alive." Richard interrupted, his voice firm and emotional. "I saw a woman who takes cleaning products not to sell them, but to disinfect a house where no one should live, but which she is turning into a safe home for her babies." "That's not true," Eleanor burst out, shame transforming into desperation. "I'm a terrible mother. My children are living like animals because of me. Leo is here because I couldn't give him a decent home where he could breathe clean air." "Don't say that!" Sam cried, hugging his mother with an intensity that surprised everyone. "You're the best mom in the world. Dad always said you were stronger than 100 men put together." "Sam's right," Chloe added, joining the family hug. "Mom, you give us love every day. You make us feel safe. You teach us to be good. That's more important than having a nice house." Richard watched this scene of unconditional love and realized he was witnessing something that he, despite all his wealth, had never experienced. These children did not love their mother despite the poverty. They loved her precisely because she had sacrificed everything, even her dignity, to protect them. "Eleanor," Richard said, with an emotion he had never allowed others to see. "Do you know what moment impacted me most of everything I saw last night?" Eleanor looked up, unable to imagine what aspect of her misery had been most memorable for her boss. "It was when I heard Leo asking if Dad was coming back from heaven," Richard continued, his voice breaking slightly. "And then, when I saw you confessing to Sam that you had taken those things from the office, I saw a woman tortured by guilt, teaching her children that what she was doing was wrong, but that sometimes extreme circumstances force us to compromise our values." "Because it is wrong," Eleanor murmured. "Stealing is wrong, no matter the reason." "You weren't stealing," Richard exclaimed with a passion that surprised even the doctor, who had been listening to the entire conversation with growing fascination. "You were taking disinfectant to clean your sick children's home. You were using cleaning products to create the most hygienic environment possible, in impossible conditions." "But they weren't mine," Eleanor insisted, clinging to that moral integrity that had been her guide throughout the crisis. "You're right," Richard admitted. "They weren't yours, but you know what? They were mine. And if I had been a better boss, a better human being, I would have seen that one of my most dedicated employees was struggling to survive. I would have noticed that you arrived early and left late, not out of ambition, but out of economic desperation." The doctor finally intervened with renewed urgency. "Excuse me, but we really need to move Leo immediately. His oxygen levels are dropping again." "Go, doctor," Richard ordered. "Do whatever is necessary. I want medical reports every hour." As a stretcher carried Leo towards intensive care, Eleanor collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the situation. Her two older children huddled beside her, forming that unbreakable family unit that had been their strength during the most difficult months. "Mr. Beaumont," Eleanor said, after several minutes of silence, "there's something you need to know, something about why we ended up living in that derelict house." Richard sat opposite her, preparing to hear more details of a story that had already profoundly impacted him. "My husband, my children's dad, was named Fernando," Eleanor began, her voice taking on that nostalgic quality people have when speaking of lost loved ones. "He was an industrial steelworker. He worked on building skyscrapers and bridges. He was a good, hard-working man who dreamed of giving his children a better life than he had had." "What happened to him?" Richard asked, though he suspected the answer would be painful. "He was working on the construction of the new Skyline Tower business complex," Eleanor continued, unaware of the impact those words would have on Richard. The construction company had decided to save money on safety equipment. The harnesses were in poor condition. The platforms did not comply with regulations, but they pressured the workers to finish quickly. Richard felt his blood run cold. The Skyline Tower was a project he knew very well. It had been one of his company's most lucrative contracts in recent years. "Fernando fell from the 18th floor because the work platform collapsed," Eleanor continued, now openly weeping. "When I tried to get the company to take responsibility, they told me it had been his negligence for not adequately checking his equipment. They denied me any compensation and threatened to sue me if I kept insisting." "What company was it?" Richard asked, though a part of him already knew the answer, and desperately hoped to be wrong. Beaumont Construction, Eleanor replied. Beaumont Holdings. The same company where I work now, cleaning the offices of the man whose company killed my husband. The silence that followed was so absolute that one could hear the hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights. Richard felt as if the ground had opened up beneath his feet. For years, Eleanor had been working for him, cleaning his office, knowing every detail of his professional life, while guarding the most devastating secret possible. "Did you know who I was when you applied for the job?" Richard asked, his voice barely audible. "Of course I knew," Eleanor replied with a calm that dramatically contrasted with the emotional storm in her eyes. "I knew exactly who you were, the owner of the company that had killed my husband and then financially destroyed my life." "Why?" Richard asked, completely overwhelmed. "Why did you come to work for me? Why didn't you confront me? Why didn't you seek revenge?" Eleanor looked at her two children, who had been listening to this revelation with expressions of growing shock and confusion. "Because I needed the job," she replied simply. "Because my children needed to eat. Because revenge wasn't going to bring Fernando back to life, nor was it going to pay our bills. And because Fernando always taught me that hatred only poisons the one who feels it." But I am responsible for your husband's death," Richard stammered, tears streaming freely down his face. "My company, my decisions about costs, my pressure to deliver projects quickly." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed with a serenity that was more devastating than any cry of anger. "You are responsible, but hating you wasn't going to feed my children." "Working for you?" "Yes." In that moment, Richard Beaumont understood that he had been in the presence of a human greatness he could never achieve, no matter how much money he accumulated or how much power he obtained. This woman had found the strength to work for the man responsible for her tragedy. She had maintained her professionalism and integrity while cleaning the office of the one who had destroyed her family. "Eleanor," he finally said, "there are no words to express how sorry I am. There is no way to compensate for what my negligence caused your family. But I swear on the lives of my own children that I will dedicate the rest of my existence to rectifying this error." "What exactly does that mean?" Sam asked, with that natural distrust that children develop when they see adults make promises they don't keep. Richard looked at the 1-2-year-old boy who had assumed adult responsibilities too soon and made the most important decision of his business life. "It means your family will never again suffer hardship," he declared with a determination that surprised even himself. "It means you will have a decent home, a full education, guaranteed medical care, and everything your father wanted to give you when he worked on my projects." "Why should we trust you?" Chloe asked with that direct honesty of children. "You already hurt us once." Richard knelt again to be at the height of the 8-year-old girl who had just asked him the most important question of his life. "Why?" he replied, his voice emotional. "Your family has taught me tonight what it truly means to be human, and because I will never again allow my ignorance to cause so much suffering." The next few hours at the hospital unfolded like an emotional roller coaster that no one in that waiting room would ever forget. Richard had remained there all morning, canceling important meetings, ignoring emergency calls from his company, completely absorbed in a reality he had never considered. The suffering of the people who worked for him. Every 30 minutes, nurses came out with updates on Leo. The little boy had been hooked up to multiple machines, his tiny body fighting an infection that had progressed more than initially thought. Doctors had explained that weeks of living in unsanitary conditions had severely compromised his immune system. "Mum, is Leo going to die?" Chloe asked, with that childish bluntness that cuts like a knife after another doctor with a worried expression left. "No, my love," Eleanor replied, although Richard could detect the uncertainty behind those words. "Leo is strong like his dad. He'll pull through." Richard watched as this family faced the possibility of another devastating loss. They had already lost Fernando. They had lost their home, their economic stability, their social dignity. The idea that they could also lose Leo was simply unbearable to contemplate. "Mr. Beaumont," Sam said suddenly, breaking the tense silence that had settled in the waiting room. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course," Richard replied, surprised by the seriousness in the boy's voice. "Do you have children?" The question hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. Yes, he had children. 2 teenagers who lived in a mansion, attended expensive private schools, who had never faced a single real difficulty in their privileged lives. Children who knew him more as a provider of money than as a present father. "Yes," he admitted in a low voice. "I have 2 children. Sebastian is 16 and Valerie is 14. Do they know where you are now?" Sam continued with that emotional intelligence developed by children who have seen too much. "No," Richard confessed, realizing he hadn't even thought to contact his own family to explain his absence. They probably think I'm in a business meeting or traveling for work. As always. As always? Chloe repeated with genuine curiosity. Richard realized that these children, who had tragically lost their father, could not comprehend how someone could have living, healthy children, but choose to be absent from their lives. For them, who valued every family moment as a treasure, the idea of a father who prioritized work over family was completely incomprehensible. My children are used to Dad not being home, Richard explained, feeling growing shame as he verbalized this reality. I've always thought my responsibility was to earn money to give them everything they needed. Big houses, expensive cars, holidays in Europe. But do you hug them? Chloe asked, with that simplicity that goes straight to the heart of important things. Do I hug them? Richard repeated, as if the question were in a foreign language. Yes, the girl insisted. We hug Mum every day, many times a day, especially when she's sad or worried. Do you hug your children when they're sad? Richard remained silent for long minutes, processing a question that revealed a fundamental void in his family life. He couldn't remember the last time he had hugged Sebastian or Valerie. Their interactions were limited to questions about school grades, money transfers for expenses, and superficial conversations during scarce family dinners. I don't think I hug them enough, he finally admitted, his voice breaking slightly. Dad hugged us every day. Sam shared with a nostalgic smile that momentarily lit up his tired face. When he came home from work, before anything else happened, he would hug us. He said his children's hugs were what gave him strength to work so hard. And on weekends, Chloe added, joining in the family memories. Dad would invent games with us. He would turn the house into a castle or a spaceship or a jungle. We didn't need expensive toys because Dad made everything fun. Richard listened to these descriptions and realized that Fernando Morgan, an industrial steelworker with modest income, had been infinitely richer than him in the only things that truly mattered. He had had the unconditional love of his family. He had built precious memories with his children. He had been the emotional center of his home. Do you know what we miss most about Dad? Eleanor asked, joining the conversation with a soft voice, but laden with emotion. What? Richard asked, preparing for another lesson on what it truly meant to be a father. The stories, Eleanor replied with a smile that mixed joy and sadness. Every night, Fernando would make up different stories for the children. Stories where they were the heroes, where they overcame obstacles, where they learned important lessons about being good people. He made them up? Richard asked, fascinated by a concept he had never considered. Completely, Sam confirmed. Dad said the best stories were the ones that came from the heart, not from books. He would tell us adventures where Leo was a superhero who could fly, where Chloe was a princess who saved kingdoms, where I was an explorer who discovered new worlds. And always, Chloe added with growing enthusiasm, at the end of every story, Dad would tell us that in real life we were even more special than in the stories, because we were his real children. Richard felt tears begin to well up again. These children had lost a father who had not only loved them, but had invested time, creativity, and emotional energy into nurturing their imaginations, into making them feel valuable, into building their self-esteem day after day. Have your children ever asked you to tell them stories? Eleanor asked with genuine curiosity. No, Richard admitted. They've always had televisions in their rooms, video games, computers. I never thought they might want something as simple as their dad telling them a story. Maybe, Sam suggested with wisdom far beyond his age. They don't know they can ask you. Maybe they're waiting for you to offer. At that precise moment, the head doctor of intensive care appeared in the waiting room. His expression was serious, but not devastating, which immediately captured everyone's attention. Morgan family, he announced, consulting his clipboard. I have news about Leo. Eleanor stood up so quickly she almost lost her balance. Her hands trembled as she prepared to hear news that could change everything. How is my baby, doctor? She asked with a trembling voice. Leo has responded very well to antibiotic treatment, the doctor explained with a reassuring smile. His breathing has stabilized considerably, and blood oxygen levels are returning to normal parameters. The relief that overwhelmed the family was so palpable that Richard could feel it physically. Eleanor collapsed again into her chair, this time out of pure gratitude, while Sam and Chloe hugged each other, crying with joy. Does that mean he's going to be okay? Chloe asked, needing absolute confirmation. It means we have overcome the immediate crisis, the doctor continued. However, Leo will need to remain hospitalized for at least another week to ensure the infection is completely eliminated, and after discharge, he will require special care at home. What kind of special care? Eleanor asked. Although Richard suspected she already knew where the conversation was heading. Leo needs to live in an environment completely free of damp, mold, and air pollution, the doctor explained, with that professional seriousness that indicated there was no room for negotiation. His lungs have been severely affected by prolonged exposure to inadequate environmental conditions. A relapse could be serious. The silence that followed was devastating. Everyone in that room knew that the derelict house where the Morgan family lived did not remotely meet those medical requirements. In fact, it was exactly the kind of environment that could put Leo at risk if he returned there. "Doctor," Richard said, standing up with determination, "what kind of housing would be ideal for Leo's recovery? A house with adequate heating and ventilation systems, no damp problems, preferably with air purifiers, and definitely no exposure to mold or deteriorated building materials," the doctor replied, basically describing everything opposite to where the family lived. "Understood," Richard said firmly. "That will not be a problem." "Mr. Beaumont," Eleanor interrupted, immediately understanding the implications of those words. "I cannot allow you to do more than you already have, the hospital, the medicines. It's already too much." "Eleanor," Richard responded, looking her directly in the eyes, "your son almost died because my corporate negligence killed his father and forced you to live in conditions no human being should face. It's not charity I'm offering, it's justice. But a house like the doctor describes must cost a fortune," Eleanor protested. "I can't accept something like that from you." "Why not?" Chloe asked, with that simple logic of children. "If Mr. Beaumont has money, and we need a house so Leo doesn't get sick, why can't he help us?" "My love," Eleanor explained patiently, "when someone gives you something very big, they can later ask for things in return that perhaps you cannot give." Richard felt those words hit him like a slap. Eleanor was right to distrust. In his business world, all favors came with conditions. All help had hidden costs. All generosities were disguised investments. "Eleanor," Richard said, with an emotion he had never allowed others to see in professional contexts, "the only thing I want in return is the opportunity to be a better man than I have been until now. The opportunity to honor Fernando's memory by doing for his children what he would have done if I hadn't been so irresponsible with workplace safety." "Really?" Sam asked, scrutinizing Richard's face with that ability children have to detect sincerity or falsehood in adults. "Truly," Richard confirmed. "And I also want to ask you a favor." "What favor?" Chloe asked with curiosity. "I want you to teach me how to be the kind of father Fernando was," Richard said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I want to learn to tell stories to my children, to hug them when they're sad, to make them feel more important than any business meeting." "Seriously?" Eleanor asked, surprised by a request she could never have anticipated. "Seriously," Richard confirmed. "You have lost the best father in the world, but your memories of him can help me become a better father to my own children. That would be the best payment you could give me." For the first time since this long night of revelations had begun, Eleanor smiled with genuine hope. "I believe," she finally said, "that Fernando would be very proud to know that his legacy will help another family find itself." 3 days after the promise made at the hospital, Richard Beaumont stood in front of a beautiful 2-story house in the Laurels residential estate, holding the keys in one hand and a purchase contract in the other. It hadn't been an impulsive decision. He had spent 72 hours meticulously researching every detail to find the perfect home for the Morgan family. The house had everything the doctor had specified for Leo's recovery. A central heating system, air purifiers in every room, large windows that allowed abundant natural light, and most importantly, it had been built just 2 years ago, with materials completely free of damp and mold. But Richard had gone beyond the keystone. Medical requirements. The property had 4 spacious bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, a modern kitchen with new appliances, a back garden where the children could play safely, and was located in an area with excellent local comprehensive schools. It was exactly the kind of home Fernando Morgan would have dreamed of providing for his family. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Beaumont?" asked Sarah Jane Thompson, the estate agent who had handled the express purchase. "It's a very generous decision, but also a very costly one. This property is worth more than many people earn in 10 years. "I am completely sure," Richard replied without hesitation. "Besides, it's not generosity, it's long overdue justice." While waiting for the arrival of the Morgan family, Richard reflected on the extraordinary changes that had occurred in his life during those 3 days. He had cancelled important meetings, delegated business decisions he would normally consider crucial, and for the first time in years, he had put the needs of other people above his own financial ambitions. More importantly, He had had the most honest conversation of his life with his own children. The previous night, he had arrived at his mansion before 8 p.m. for the first time in months. Sebastian and Valerie were having dinner alone in the main dining room, as was their usual routine, while he typically worked late or attended business events. "Dad," Valerie had said, surprised to see him appear so early. "Is everything all right at the company? We didn't expect to see you until the weekend." Those words had broken his heart. His own children were surprised to see him at home during the week, as if his paternal presence was an extraordinary event that only occurred occasionally. "I need to tell you something very important," he had told them, sitting down with them for the first time in months. "And I need to ask for your forgiveness for the kind of father I have been until now." Over the next 2 hours, he had told them the whole story. Eleanor, the derelict house, Leo in the hospital, Fernando's death on one of his construction projects, and the devastating lesson about what it truly meant to be a present father. "Dad," Sebastian had said, with a maturity that surprised him, "we know you work hard to give us a good life. We've never felt that you don't love us." But, Valerie had added, with that direct honesty she inherited from her mother, "we have felt that you don't really know us, as if you know we exist, but you don't know who we are." Those words had been more impactful than any business criticism he had received. His children didn't blame him for working so much, but they recognized that he had missed the opportunity to get to know them as individual people, with dreams, fears, unique personalities. "What can we do to change that?" he had asked them, genuinely interested in hearing their ideas. "Well," Valerie had replied after thinking carefully, "you could start by asking us how our day was when you get home, not just if we did our homework or got good grades. And maybe," Sebastian had added, "you could tell us stories about when you were little. We never know anything about how you grew up, what you liked to do, how you met Mum." Richard had promised that all that would change and had begun that very night by telling them about his own childhood, about the mistakes he had made in prioritizing financial success over human relationships, and about how a family in crisis had taught him lessons no business school could offer. Now, standing in front of the Morgan family's new house, Richard felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement he hadn't experienced since he was a young entrepreneur building his first company. But this time, success would not be measured in economic profits, but in the smile of a mother who could finally give her children a decent home. The taxi pulled up in front of the house exactly at 2 p.m., as they had agreed. Leo had been discharged from the hospital that morning, and although he still looked fragile, his cheeks had regained some of the healthy pink color of childhood. Eleanor got out of the vehicle first, followed by Sam, who carefully helped Leo down, while Chloe immediately ran towards the front garden. "Mum, look how beautiful these flowers are," Chloe shouted, pointing to the rose bushes decorating the entrance. "And there's a swing on that tree." "Chloe, don't touch anything," Eleanor warned automatically with the caution of someone who had learned not to expect too much from life. "This isn't our house. We're here to see it, but we don't know if—" "Eleanor," Richard interrupted gently, approaching with the keys extended towards her. "This is your house, completely yours." The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the wind rustling the leaves of the tree where a swing was indeed installed. Eleanor looked at the keys as if they were magical objects that might disappear if she touched them. "What do you mean, completely ours?" Sam asked with that protective distrust he had developed during months of uncertainty. "I mean," Richard explained, kneeling to be at the height of the 3 children, "that the house is completely paid for, that it's registered in your mum's name, and that no one can ever take it from you." "It's ours forever? Really forever?" Leo asked, with that small voice that still showed signs of his recent illness, but shone with cautious hope. "Really forever," Richard confirmed, feeling his eyes fill with tears as he saw the expression of astonishment on the little boy's face. Eleanor finally took the keys with trembling hands. For months she had dreamed of this moment, but she had never believed it was possible. She had nightly fantasies where she imagined her children running through a real house, sleeping in real beds, bathing with hot water, but she had always woken up in that derelict house, where reality hit her brutally. "Can we go in and see inside?" Chloe asked, practically jumping with excitement. "Of course," Richard replied, leading the family towards the front door. "It's your home, you can do whatever you want." When Eleanor opened the door, what they found inside exceeded all expectations they could have had. Richard had not only bought the house, he had completely furnished it with everything necessary for a family with 3 children. In the main living room, there was a comfortable 3-seater sofa, a solid wood coffee table, a large screen television mounted on the wall, and most importantly, a bookshelf full of children's and young adult books. The kitchen was fully equipped with new appliances, complete dinnerware, and the pantry was stocked with enough food for several weeks. "Mum, there's a staircase," Sam shouted, running towards the first floor like a normal 1-2-year-old boy for the first time in months. "And each room has its own bed," added Chloe, who had followed her older brother upstairs. Richard had paid special attention to the bedrooms. The master bedroom had a queen-size bed with new bedding, a spacious wardrobe, and a dresser with a mirror. The children's rooms were decorated appropriately for their ages. Sam's had a desk for studying and educational posters. Chloe's was painted in soft tones with a single bed decorated with new dolls. And Leo's had a convertible cot that could transform into a big boy bed, along with a special humidifier recommended by doctors. "Mr. Beaumont," Eleanor said, her voice breaking with emotion, "this is too much. It's more than I ever dreamed of giving my children. I don't know how we will ever be able to repay you." "Eleanor," Richard replied, sitting next to her on the new sofa. "Do you remember what you told me at the hospital about why you decided to work for me instead of seeking revenge?" "Because revenge wasn't going to feed my children," Eleanor repeated, recalling her own words. "Exactly," Richard continued. "Well, this house isn't revenge for what my company did to Fernando. This house is my way of honoring his memory, making sure his children have the opportunities he wanted to give them." "Mum, come see my room," Leo shouted from upstairs, his voice full of a joy they hadn't heard in months. When they went upstairs, they found the three children exploring their new rooms with expressions of pure amazement. Leo had discovered that his bed had side rails to prevent falls, but they could also be removed when he was older. Chloe was hugging a new doll she had found on her bed. Sam was looking through the books on his desk, books appropriate for his age and educational level. "Can I really keep all these books?" Sam asked, holding a natural science encyclopedia. "They're yours," Richard confirmed. "And there are more books downstairs in the family library. I thought maybe you'd like to read stories to your siblings, like your dad used to do." Sam's eyes filled with tears. For months he had taken on adult responsibilities out of necessity, but now he was being offered the opportunity to be an older brother in normal circumstances, to care for Leo and Chloe out of love instead of desperation. "Mr. Beaumont," Sam said, with a seriousness that was moving, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do your children know what you are doing for us?" The question surprised Richard because it revealed that Sam had been thinking not only about his own family, but about how these actions could affect other people. "Yes," Richard replied. "I told them your whole story, and they know that you have taught me very important lessons about what it means to be a family." "What kind of lessons?" Chloe asked, joining the conversation with that natural curiosity of children. "They taught me that hugging children is more important than buying them expensive things," Richard explained. "They taught me that telling stories at home is more valuable than working late. They taught me that knowing my children's dreams is more important than making more money." "Are you going to start hugging your children more?" Leo asked, with that direct innocence that only small children possess. "I already started," Richard confirmed, with a genuine smile. "Last night I hugged Sebastian and Valerie for the first time in months. And do you know what I discovered?" "What?" the three children asked in unison. "That they also needed those hugs, but they didn't know how to ask me for them." Eleanor, who had been listening to this conversation while exploring the master bathroom with its new shower and hot water, approached the group with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, with a voice full of emotion, "Fernando would be very proud to know that his story is helping another family find itself." "Do you really think so?" Richard asked, genuinely needing that confirmation. "Completely," Eleanor replied, without hesitation. "Fernando always said that tragedies only made sense if we turned them into opportunities to make the world a little better." "Mum," Chloe said suddenly, "can we invite Mr. Beaumont and his children to dinner here someday so we can get to know them and maybe teach them some of the games Dad taught us?" The suggestion took Richard completely by surprise. These children, who had lost so much, who had suffered so much due to his company's negligence, were now offering to share their new happiness with his family. It was a level of generosity and forgiveness that deeply moved him. "I would love to," Richard replied. "And I'm sure Sebastian and Valerie would love to meet you too. Can we show them how Dad taught us to make little plays?" Chloe exclaimed with growing enthusiasm. "And Sam can tell them some of the stories Dad used to make up for us. And Leo can teach them his favorite songs," Sam added, holding his younger brother with that protective tenderness he had developed during the difficult months. Richard observed this spontaneous planning of a family gathering and realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. These children were not thinking in terms of us versus them, or poor versus rich. They were simply thinking in terms of families who could help each other to be happier. "There's one more thing I want to show you," Richard said, leading the family towards the master bedroom window overlooking the back garden. In the garden, there was something that had taken days of special planning. A small raised vegetable patch with fertile soil, gardening tools appropriate for children, and seeds for vegetables and herbs that the family could grow together. "Fernando always wanted to teach his children to grow their own food," Richard explained. "Eleanor told me at the hospital that he talked about having a garden where they could learn where real food comes from." "Dad told you that?" Sam asked, surprised that Richard knew such intimate details about his father's dreams. "Your mum told me," Richard clarified, "and I thought maybe you could teach me too. I've never planted anything in my life." "Yes," Leo shouted, clapping his small hands that already looked stronger after the medical treatment. "We can plant tomatoes and lettuces and carrots and pretty flowers for Mum," Chloe added, always thinking of making her mother happy. Eleanor approached the window and observed the garden with an expression that mixed gratitude, astonishment, and a deep melancholy. It was exactly what Fernando had dreamed for his family, and although he was not physically present to see it, his spirit and his values were completely alive in this moment. "Fernando," she murmured softly, speaking to her deceased husband, as if he could hear her. "Our babies finally have the home you wanted to give them." Richard realized he was witnessing a sacred moment, an instant where love transcends death and where postponed dreams finally find fulfillment. It was not just a house he was delivering. It was the materialization of the hopes of a father who had died too soon, but whose legacy would continue to live on in his children. "Eleanor," Richard said, "finally, there's one condition for this house." The instant panic that appeared in the woman's eyes broke his heart, but it was necessary to establish this specific condition. "What condition?" she asked with a trembling voice. "That you allow me to change all the health and safety policies at Beaumont Holdings," Richard replied with absolute seriousness. "That you help me implement protocols that ensure no other worker suffers what Fernando suffered. That you turn your husband's tragedy into the salvation of other workers." Eleanor looked at him for long seconds, processing the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Are you serious?" she finally asked. "Completely serious," Richard confirmed. "I want Fernando Morgan to become the name of the strictest workplace safety program in the entire construction industry." For the first time since the loss of her husband, Eleanor felt that the tragedy that had destroyed her life would finally have a purpose that would honor Fernando's memory in the most significant way possible. "I accept," she said with a firm voice. "I accept with all my heart." The first family dinner between the Beaumont and Morgan families took place a week after the house handover. Richard arrived at 6 p.m. with Sebastian and Valerie, carrying flowers for Eleanor and educational toys for the 3 children. His children had been nervous all day, unsure what to expect from this family that had so profoundly transformed their father. The house, once an impossible dream, now brimmed with life and human warmth. The aroma of home-cooked food mingled with the sound of children's laughter, creating that atmosphere of a true home that no mansion could replicate. Leo had improved remarkably. His cheeks had a healthy color, and his breathing was clear and strong. "Dad," Valerie whispered as they walked towards the front door. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Richard admitted honestly, "but it's a good nervousness, like when you're about to experience something special." Eleanor opened the door with a radiant smile that dramatically contrasted with the desperate woman Richard had seen at the hospital weeks ago. She wore a simple but clean dress, and there was something in her posture that spoke of recovered dignity. "Welcome to our home," she said with a genuine warmth that immediately put Sebastian and Valerie at ease. The first few minutes were inevitably awkward. Sebastian and Valerie, accustomed to formal dinners served by domestic staff, found themselves in a kitchen where the family itself prepared the food and where everyone was expected to help set the table. "Do you need help with anything?" Sebastian asked, not knowing exactly how to offer assistance in an environment so different from his usual experience. "Of course," Sam replied with enthusiasm. "Can you help me carry the plates to the table?" "In our family, everyone helps with everything." Valerie watched, fascinated, as Chloe helped Leo wash his hands before eating, as Sam checked that everything was ready, as Eleanor coordinated activities with an efficiency born of love rather than rigidity. It was a completely new kind of family dynamic for her. The dinner consisted of simple dishes, but prepared with care. Chicken casserole, roasted potatoes, vegetables, fresh salad from the garden they had started to grow, and crusty homemade bread. There was nothing luxurious, but every bite had a flavor that spoke of time invested, of attention given, of food prepared as an act of love. In our family, Eleanor explained as she served the dishes. "We have a tradition for dinners. Each person shares something good that happened to them during the day, and something they are grateful for." "Something good and something to be grateful for?" Valerie repeated as if it were a completely foreign concept. "Yes," Leo confirmed with that contagious joy of small children. "I always start because I'm the youngest. Something good that happened to me today was that I could run in the garden without getting tired, and I'm grateful because my chest doesn't hurt when I breathe anymore." The simplicity and depth of those words impacted Sebastian and Valerie. This 5-year-old boy, who had been on the verge of something very serious weeks ago, found joy in being able to breathe normally and run without pain. Their own daily worries about grades, video games, and social plans seemed trivial in comparison. "I'm next," Chloe announced. "Something good that happened to me was that I found a butterfly in our garden, and it stayed on my finger for a long time, and I'm grateful because I have my own room where I can keep all my treasures." "What kind of treasures?" Valerie asked with genuine curiosity. "Pretty stones I find in the garden, leaves with interesting shapes, drawings I make for Mum," Chloe explained seriously. "Dad always said the most valuable treasures don't cost money." Sam continued. "Something good that happened to me was that I completely understood my maths homework without help, and I'm grateful because I can study at my own desk without distracting noises." Eleanor smiled with maternal pride before speaking. "Something good that happened to me today was seeing Leo playing happily in the garden, and I'm grateful because my children have a safe home where they can grow and dream." Everyone turned to Richard, Sebastian, and Valerie. It was their turn to participate in this family tradition, but none of them had ever reflected on their day in such an intentional way. We've never done this before," Richard admitted, honestly. "But I want to try." "Something good that happened to me today was seeing Leo smile when he ran to the door to greet us. And I'm grateful, because you are teaching me how to be a better father." Sebastian hesitated before speaking. "Something good. I think something good that happened to me was meeting Sam and realizing that there are people my age who are much more mature and responsible than I am. And I'm grateful because Dad is learning to spend more time with us." Valerie was last. "Something good that happened to me was seeing how Chloe takes care of Leo. It made me think about how I can be a better big sister. And I'm grateful because this family is showing me what it really means to love each other." The silence that followed was full of warmth and connection. It was evident that something fundamental had begun to change in the dynamic of both families. "Now," Sam announced with enthusiasm, "it's story time." For the next hour, the Morgan children shared the stories Fernando used to tell them, but with a special twist. They invited Sebastian and Valerie to be characters in the adventures. Chloe invented a story where Valerie was a scientist, princess who saved kingdoms with her experiments. Sam created an adventure where Sebastian was an explorer who discovered lost civilizations. Leo, with the help of his siblings, told a story where they were all superheroes who worked together to make the world better. Richard observed this interaction and realized that his children were experiencing something they had never had: the pure joy of shared imagination, of creating fantastic worlds with other children, of being valued not for what they possessed, but for who they were as people. "Dad," Valerie asked when the stories ended, "could we do this at home too? The gratitude dinners and the stories." "I would love to," Richard replied, feeling more connected to his children than he had been in years. As the night progressed, the conversation grew deeper. Eleanor told Sebastian and Valerie about Fernando, not as a tragic figure, but as a loving father who had filled their lives with joy and valuable lessons. "What do you miss most about him?" Sebastian asked with genuine curiosity. "His laugh," Leo replied immediately. "Dad used to laugh very loudly when we played, and the whole house would fill with happiness." "His bear hugs," Chloe added. "He would hug us so tight we felt like nothing bad could happen to us while we were in his arms." "His advice," Sam said with the seriousness of someone who had had to grow up too fast. "He always knew exactly what to tell us when we had problems or when we were confused." "But do you know what's most incredible?" Eleanor added with a smile full of love. "All those things we miss about Dad are still alive in you." Leo has his joyful laugh. Chloe gives hugs that heal the heart, and Sam has that special wisdom to help others. "Really?" Leo asked, with bright eyes. "Completely true," his mother confirmed. "Dad lives through you every day." This conversation had a profound impact on Sebastian and Valerie. They realized that they had been taking their father's presence for granted, not appreciating the opportunities to create memories and meaningful connections while it was still possible. "Dad," Sebastian said later that night on the way home, "could we start doing things together on weekends? Not expensive things, but things like Sam's dad used to do with them?" "And what kind of things do you have in mind?" Richard asked. excited by this initiative from his son. Maybe we could learn to cook together, Valerie suggested, or do projects in the garden, or just sit and talk without TV or phones. That sounds perfect, Richard replied, feeling his heart fill with a happiness that no business success had been able to provide him. 3 weeks later, Richard was in his office, but this time not working late. It was Friday afternoon, and he had established a new personal policy. No more work after 5 p.m. on Fridays, and weekends were sacred for family. Eleanor had started working as a health and safety consultant for Beaumont Holdings, helping to design protocols that would protect other workers from tragedies like the one Fernando had suffered. Her intimate knowledge of the human consequences of corporate negligence had made her a powerful voice for change. "Mr. Beaumont," Eleanor said, entering his office with a folder full of documents, "I have the final report on the new safety measures for the Fernando Morgan program. Over the past few weeks, they had worked together to implement the strictest workplace safety standards in the industry. Highest quality protective equipment, mandatory daily inspections, comprehensive training for all workers, and an emergency fund for the families of any employee injured on the job. What are the results?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer from the weekly reports. "Zero workplace accidents across all our construction sites for the last 3 weeks, Eleanor reported with evident pride. Workers say they feel safer and more valued than ever before. Oh, and the financial impact. The initial costs were significant, Eleanor admitted. But the savings in insurance, legal claims, and lost time due to accidents are already offsetting the investment. Furthermore, our reputation as a responsible company is attracting better workers and more prestigious contracts." Richard smiled, remembering how he used to think that workplace safety was an unnecessary expense that reduced profits. Now he understood that it was an investment in human lives that also happened to be an excellent business decision. "Eleanor," he said, closing the folder, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever feel that Fernando would be proud of what we have achieved?" Eleanor smiled with that serenity she had developed during months of healing. "Every day. Especially when I see other workers returning safe and sound to their families, knowing that their children won't go through what mine did." "And your children? How are they adapting to all the changes?" "Leo is completely healthy. Doctors say there are no traces of the respiratory infection," Eleanor reported with maternal joy. "Chloe is flourishing in her new school. Her teachers say she is a brilliant and compassionate child." "And Sam? What about Sam?" "Sam surprises me every day," Eleanor continued with pride. "He has started talking about studying civil engineering when he grows up. He wants to design buildings that are completely safe for all workers. Seriously, he says he wants to continue the work his dad started and that you are helping to finish," Eleanor explained. "He wants the Morgan name to be synonymous with safe construction." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. Fernando's son had not only overcome the tragedy, but was transforming it into inspiration to dedicate his life to protecting others. "Eleanor," he finally said, "I want to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "I want to establish a university scholarship fund in Fernando Morgan's name," Richard explained with growing enthusiasm. "For children of construction workers who want to study engineering, architecture, or any career related to making the industry safer." "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. And I want you to administer that fund," Richard continued. "Who better than Fernando's widow to decide which young people deserve the opportunity to turn tragedies into solutions?" Eleanor was speechless for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what Richard was proposing. "Do you know what this means?" she finally asked. "It means that Fernando Morgan will become a force for good that transcends his own death," Richard replied. "It means his legacy will save lives for generations." "I accept," Eleanor said with a firm and emotional voice. "I accept with all my heart and in Fernando's name." That same night, in the house that now overflowed with life and happiness, the two families met again for dinner. But this time, there was an additional tradition. At the end of dinner, they lit a special candle in honor of Fernando Morgan. "Dad," Chloe said, addressing the candle as if Fernando could hear her. "Today, Mr. Beaumont told us about the scholarships that will help other children study to do safer jobs. Are you proud of us?" At that moment, as if the universe wanted to answer the girl's question, a gentle breeze moved the window curtains, making the candle flame dance in a special way. "Dad is here," Leo whispered, with that absolute certainty of small children. "He's telling us he is proud." Richard watched this scene and realized he had witnessed the most extraordinary transformation of his life. A tragedy had been turned into redemption, an injustice had been transformed into justice, and a death had given life to a legacy that would protect countless future families. "Do you know what's most incredible about this whole story?" Richard said, looking at all the children present. "What?" they asked in unison. "That Fernando Morgan will never be just a name on a headstone," Richard explained with deep emotion. "He will be the name on university scholarships that help young people study. He will be the name in safety protocols that save lives. He will be the name that other workers remember when they return safely to their homes every night. And he will be the name that we carry with pride forever," Sam added. With that maturity he had developed through adversity transformed into purpose. "Exactly," Richard confirmed. "Fernando Morgan has become immortal, not because he is physically with us, but because his love, his values, and his sacrifice continue to make the world better every day." In that moment, with two families united around a table, with a candle honoring the memory of a good man, and with the future shining with promises of lives saved and dreams fulfilled, everyone understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Fernando Morgan's death had been a tragedy, but his legacy had become the most beautiful story of redemption, love, and hope any of them could have imagined. And every time a worker returned safe and sound to their home, every time a young person received a scholarship to study, every time a family did not have to suffer what the Morgan family suffered, Fernando Morgan would continue to live, because true love never dies. It only transforms into increasingly beautiful ways of making the world better.